It starts in the quiet moments you never give yourself. The morning before your phone lights up, the pause between songs, the empty room when the world hasn't yet remembered you exist. For a second, there's nothing. No messages, no music, no stimulation. Just stillness. And that stillness feels unbearable. So you reach for something. A scroll. A song. A distraction. Anything that fills the silence. Because silence, in a world this loud, feels like death. But what if silence isn't the absence of life? What if it's where life actually begins? We live surrounded by 1,000 tiny noises that we call living. The hum of the city, the flicker of screens, the chatter of people trying not to feel alone. We confuse motion for meaning, sound for significance. We've built our identities around constant input, always consuming, always connected, always distracted. But beneath that endless noise, something inside you grows tired. You feel it when you close your eyes at night and there's nothing left to look at. The exhaustion that has nothing to do with work or sleep. The kind of fatigue that comes from never meeting yourself. Because you've been running, not from others, but from the stillness that lives inside you. The silence that reminds you of everything you haven't faced. Every unresolved thought. Every emotion you never named. Every truth you didn't want to hear. Psychologists call it avoidance behavior. When discomfort arises, the mind looks for escape routes. Social media, conversations, work, even dreams of productivity. Anything but stillness. Because stillness reflects you back to yourself, without filters, without distraction, without escape. And in that mirror, most people see a stranger. We've been trained to fill every gap. If there's silence in a conversation, we rush to fill it. If there's quiet in our day, we turn on something, music, TV, noise. We treat silence like a problem to be solved rather than a space to inhabit. But silence isn't empty. It's full of everything you've been avoiding. When you strip away the stimulation, you start to feel the raw pulse of your own existence. And for most people, that's terrifying. Because when the noise fades, the truth starts to whisper. You realize how much of your life has been spent reacting, not living. How much of your energy is devoted to avoiding the uncomfortable, not the world, but yourself. Think about it. When was the last time you sat somewhere, completely still, without music, without your phone, without the urge to do something? How long did it take before the anxiety crept in, that restless itch that says, I should be doing something? That's not boredom. That's the body's withdrawal from noise, like an addict without a fix. We've normalized constant stimulation. It's not just the internet, it's our entire cultural rhythm. We reward busyness, idolize productivity, and call distraction connection. But in truth, we've become disconnected from the one thing that makes everything feel alive: presence. Presence only exists in silence. When you're silent, your senses start to return. You begin to notice details that were always there but drowned out. The subtle sound of wind through leaves, the rhythm of your own breathing, the warmth of sunlight on your face. The world starts to move slower, and for a moment, it feels almost alive. But to reach that point, you have to face the discomfort first. Silence will surface the noise inside you. The inner chatter, the worries, the regrets, the guilt. It's like all the static you've been carrying suddenly becomes audible. And most people interpret that as, I can't stand silence. But the truth is, you're not reacting to silence, you're reacting to yourself. This is why silence feels so threatening. It dismantles illusions. It strips away the external definitions of who you are, the achievements, the distractions, the conversations, and leaves you with something raw and real. The part of you that exists without validation, without applause, without identity. In the absence of sound, the soul begins to speak. It doesn't shout. It doesn't explain. It simply is. And if you can stay long enough in that space, if you resist the reflex to fill it, something begins to shift. You start to sense that silence isn't empty, it's sacred. It holds the blueprint of your awareness, the still center from which everything else arises. Every thought, every emotion, every sound emerges from it and dissolves back into it. And for the first time, you see the pattern, that the world's noise isn't the problem. It's our inability to sit still with ourselves that makes us numb to its beauty. We run because we're afraid that if we stop, we'll find nothing. But in truth, if we stop long enough, we'll find everything. The silence you've been escaping isn't lifeless. It's alive, humming, breathing, waiting for you to listen. It's the background of all existence, the canvas on which life paints itself. And maybe the reason the world feels dull, chaotic, or meaningless isn't because life has lost its color, but because you've forgotten how to hear it. In silence, every small thing begins to matter again. The world reawakens, not because it changed, but because you did. You stopped escaping the quiet. You turned toward it. And in that moment, you began to remember what it feels like to be alive. Maybe silence was never the absence of life. Maybe it was the doorway back to it. Silence is not just the absence of sound, it is a mirror that reflects everything you are and everything you try not to be. When the world grows quiet, you begin to meet the parts of yourself that live beneath the noise, the fragments of memory, emotion, and fear that have been pushed into the dark corners of the mind. This is why silence can feel uncomfortable, even unbearable at first. It doesn't just show you the calm, it shows you the chaos you've been carrying. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." In silence, the outer distractions fade and you are left with only one thing, yourself. And that can be terrifying. Because most of us have spent years building our lives around the avoidance of that confrontation. When you sit still long enough, the unconscious begins to speak, not in words, but in feelings, images, and subtle intuitions. You start to notice the patterns. The way you react to loneliness, the way you chase comfort, the way you run from stillness. Silence holds up a mirror to the psyche, and what you see there depends on how willing you are to face your own depths. Jung called this process shadow integration. The shadow is everything we repress, the anger we deny, the sadness we numb, the fears we hide. When the outer world grows silent, the shadow comes forward to be acknowledged. But instead of listening, we often drown it in stimulation. We turn on music, scroll through feeds, fill the room with conversation, anything to avoid hearing the voice that asks, "Who am I?" when there's nothing left to distract me. Yet that is the question that transforms a life. Nietzsche spoke of eternal recurrence, the idea that you should live in such a way that if your life were to repeat forever, you would embrace it. But how many of us could bear the thought of reliving our days exactly as they are now, filled with constant motion, yet void of depth? Silence reveals that truth. It asks, if you had to live this same noise, this same escape, again and again, would it fulfill you or exhaust you? The truth is, silence doesn't empty your life, it expands it. It slows the pace of perception so that you can finally see. You notice how each sound, each breath, each detail of the world carries a kind of sacred presence. The sound of your heartbeat becomes a rhythm of existence. The way light moves through a room feels almost divine. In the teachings of Alan Watts, silence is not the enemy of sound. It is what gives sound its meaning. Music, after all, exists because of pauses. Words mean something because of the space between them. In the same way, life gains depth through the stillness that surrounds it. Without silence, there would be no perception, only constant noise. What's often said that our obsession with control makes us fear the unknown. We cling to noise, plans, and activity because silence threatens our illusion of control. When we fall into stillness, we are faced with uncertainty, and in that uncertainty lies our true vulnerability. But it is also the birthplace of creativity, insight, and peace. Think of silence as the soil in which understanding grows. Without it, ideas cannot take root. Without quiet reflection, we mistake repetition for progress. The constant noise keeps us in motion but prevents us from transformation. In Eastern philosophy, silence is seen as the language of the divine. In Zen, the master's silence can speak more truth than 1,000 words. Because silence doesn't explain, it reveals. It allows awareness to unfold naturally, without the interference of thought. When you sit in silence long enough, something subtle begins to shift. The boundaries between you and the world begin to dissolve. The sound of a bird, the rustle of leaves, the hum of distant life, they're no longer out there. They are happening with you. You start to experience what the mystics meant when they said, "The observer and the observed are one." In that moment, silence becomes presence. Presence is not a mental state, it's a realization. It's the recognition that everything you were trying to control, escape, or fix was never separate from you. The world you thought was dull begins to glow, not because it changed, but because you finally stopped trying to change it. Modern psychology supports this too. Studies on sensory deprivation show that after an initial period of discomfort, the human brain begins to rewire itself in silence. Creativity increases, emotional clarity deepens, and stress decreases. The mind, no longer overloaded, starts to perceive with greater precision. But here's the paradox. Most people never reach that stage because they give up too soon. They mistake the first wave of discomfort for the whole experience. They feel the anxiety, the restlessness, the noise of their own thoughts, and they flee back to distraction. But if they stayed just a little longer, something miraculous would happen. The storm of thoughts would settle, and a deeper stillness would emerge. This is the silence that doesn't just quiet the world, it quiets you. It's the silence beneath your thoughts, beneath your fears, beneath even your identity. And when you touch it, even for a moment, the world feels different. The colors seem richer. Time feels slower. People's voices sound softer, more real. It's as if existence itself becomes more three-dimensional, more alive. You realize that life was never dull, it was your perception that was numb. Silence reawakens that perception. It strips away the filters built by constant stimulation and lets reality touch you again, directly, without translation. You begin to sense the rhythm of things, how everything moves in cycles, how every sound rises and falls back into quiet, how even chaos rests in stillness between its bursts. You start to feel part of that rhythm, not apart from it. And in that realization, a strange peace appears, not the peace of escape, but the peace of participation. You are no longer running from silence, because you understand that silence is not the opposite of life. It is the ground of life. When you stop trying to fill every gap, you begin to hear what was always there, the subtle hum beneath existence. The quiet heartbeat of being. The space between each thought where awareness waits patiently for you to notice it. Silence is not a void to be feared. It is the mirror in which the universe recognizes itself. It is the pause that makes the music of life possible. And it's only when you stop escaping that mirror, when you finally dare to look, that you discover what it means to be fully alive. When you stop filling the gaps, you start to hear what was always there, the quiet heartbeat of existence itself. There comes a point when you stop fighting silence and begin to let it hold you. At first, it feels like surrender, a loss of control, a falling into something vast and unfamiliar. But slowly, something changes. The stillness that once felt heavy now feels alive. The same silence that once mirrored your fears begins to reveal something else: peace, clarity, and presence. You start to notice the details that were always there but never truly seen. The gentle rhythm of your breathing. The way the light flickers across a wall. The faint sound of the world breathing with you. It's not that these things suddenly appeared, it's that your awareness finally slowed down enough to meet them. This is the beginning of awakening. Not a mystical revelation, but a return to the natural rhythm of being. In silence, you stop needing life to impress you. You stop demanding that every moment be extraordinary. You begin to understand that the extraordinary hides inside the ordinary, that beauty was never in the noise but in the quiet awareness that holds it. You start to feel what Carl Jung meant when he spoke about individuation, the process of becoming whole. True wholeness isn't found in external achievement or the approval of others. It's found in reconciling the many fragments within yourself. Silence is where that reconciliation begins. Because only in silence can all the parts of you finally meet. The mind that once resisted stillness starts to soften. The ego that always needed to do, to prove, to perform, begins to dissolve. You stop thinking of yourself as something separate from life and start to feel yourself as part of it. And then, something subtle happens. The fear begins to fade. The fear of missing out. the fear of being forgotten, the fear of not doing enough, not being enough. In the quiet, these fears lose their grip, because you realize there was never anything to prove. You were already whole. You were already enough. There is a strange beauty in this surrender. When you no longer fill every silence, life fills it for you. The world starts speaking again, not in words, but in sensations. A breeze through an open window, the sound of rain, the distant hum of a city that feels less chaotic now, and more like a pulse, steady, alive, breathing. You start to see that silence isn't a void, it's a vessel. It holds space for everything, for grief, for love, for understanding. When you stop escaping it, silence becomes your teacher. It teaches patience, the kind that doesn't rush for answers. It teaches humility, the kind that accepts not knowing. And it teaches presence, the kind that doesn't demand life to be different before it can be beautiful. Alan Watts once said, "You and I are all as much continuous with the physical universe as a wave is continuous with the ocean." When you settle into silence, you begin to feel that truth directly. You're not separate from the sound of the wind, you are that wind, expressed as a body, a breath, a thought. You realize that everything you feared was silence was actually connection, to the world, to yourself, to existence itself. There's a moment in stillness where awareness deepens so much that even your thoughts begin to sound distant. You no longer chase them or resist them, you just watch them rise and fall like waves on the surface of a vast, calm sea. And underneath it all, there's something constant, a quiet presence that has always been there. That presence is not your personality. It's not your story. It's the essence that watches the story unfold. When you start living from that space, even small things feel sacred. The taste of water, the warmth of your hands, the sound of footsteps on the ground. You begin to sense life not as something happening to you, but as something happening through you. This is the transformation, not becoming someone new, but remembering who you were before the noise began. Silence becomes the bridge back to authenticity. You start to move through the world differently. More slowly. More intentionally. You speak less, but your words carry more weight. You listen more, not just to others, but to what is unsaid, to what is felt. The things you used to chase, validation, distraction, excitement, lose their pull. They no longer define your sense of meaning. You start to understand that meaning isn't something you find in noise. It's something that unfolds in stillness. It's as if silence recalibrates your perception. What once felt dull now glows with quiet aliveness. The mundane becomes miraculous. Even moments of solitude feel rich, full of texture and warmth. You begin to see that silence isn't passive. It's creative. It gives birth to insight, to healing, to clarity. When you stop running from silence, you give space for your own inner voice to emerge. Not the voice of fear or expectation, but the voice of truth. You realize that most of life's answers were never hidden, they were just buried under noise. Silence doesn't give you something new, it removes what was never real. It strips away the false layers until all that's left is what was always true. And in that truth, the world feels alive again. The same streets, the same sky, the same people, but seen through a different lens. A lens cleansed by stillness. You start to feel gratitude, not as a concept, but as a constant undercurrent in everything you do. Sometimes the most profound realizations come without words. They come as a feeling that spreads through your chest, a quiet recognition that this, right here, is enough. You don't need to fix it. You don't need to escape it. You just need to be with it. The more you listen, the more silence speaks. It whispers not of emptiness, but of fullness, a fullness that doesn't need noise to exist. And once you hear that language, even once, it changes the way you move through life forever. You begin to realize that silence doesn't separate you from the world. It connects you to it. It doesn't take away meaning, it gives meaning back. Because silence is not the opposite of sound. It is the foundation that gives sound its life. When you stop fighting stillness, when you finally stop trying to fill every quiet moment, you start to notice something miraculous. The world has always been singing. You just couldn't hear it before. You start to see. Not through the mind, but through presence. The world hasn't changed. You have. And in that shift, you understand something profound. Silence doesn't steal life's meaning. It gives it back. The world doesn't grow quieter when you embrace silence. It becomes more alive. The noise doesn't disappear, it transforms. What once felt chaotic begins to sound like music, because now you're listening differently. You're not reacting to life anymore, you're participating in it. Integration begins here, not in the mountains, not in retreat, but in the middle of your everyday existence. The real challenge isn't finding silence in isolation. It's carrying it with you into the noise, into the city, into your relationships, into the moments that used to pull you away from yourself. You wake up and realize that silence isn't about escaping the world. It's about returning to it, with new eyes, with a heart uncluttered by noise. You start to find stillness not in the absence of sound, but in the quality of your attention. There's silence in the way sunlight rests on your desk, in the rhythm of footsteps down a busy street, in the pause before you respond to someone. Silence starts to weave itself into your daily rhythm, like a secret thread holding everything together. This is what Viktor Frankl meant when he spoke of the space between stimulus and response. Between what happens to you and how you react, there is a moment, a silent moment, where freedom lives. In that space, you can choose not to be ruled by habit, not to be pulled by noise, not to be lost in reaction. You can choose to act from awareness. That is where meaning begins. Not in control, not in distraction, but in conscious participation. Silence becomes a space of choice, a pause that allows life to unfold rather than be chased. You start to live slower. Not because you're lazy, but because you're finally paying attention. You begin to see that rushing was never a sign of productivity, it was a symptom of disconnection. The slower you move, the deeper you see. Now, when you sit in a cafe, the same one that once felt suffocating, something feels different. You don't need your phone to fill the emptiness. You don't need the noise to drown your thoughts. You're simply there, breathing, observing, alive. The same place, the same sounds, but your awareness has changed the entire experience. Silence has followed you back into the world, not as absence, but as presence. It's there in the way you listen to someone without planning your reply. It's in the way you walk, unhurried, sensing the world move around you. It's in the moments when you no longer fear being alone, because you've discovered that solitude is not loneliness, it's intimacy with life itself. And slowly, something remarkable happens. Life stops feeling like something to survive and starts feeling like something to belong to. You notice the subtleties, how the wind shifts before rain, how laughter lingers after a conversation, how even silence between people can feel full. You no longer crave constant stimulation because your senses have deepened. You can hear the heartbeat beneath the chaos. You can feel the stillness inside the motion. The world becomes a living symphony, not because it changed, but because you finally stopped trying to conduct it. You let life play itself through you. This is the quiet revolution, to live from silence in a world addicted to noise. It doesn't mean rejecting sound, it means listening to it differently. You become more grounded, more compassionate, more real. The ego begins to fade into something larger, awareness itself. Now you understand that silence isn't fragile. It doesn't need perfect conditions. It's not something you lose when the world gets loud, it's something you carry within you, an inner stillness that cannot be touched by chaos. You see now that the world was never truly silent or noisy, it was only reflecting the state of your own mind. When the mind was restless, even peace felt overwhelming. But now, even in noise, you can find quiet. Even in movement, you can feel stillness. You begin to meet others differently too. You start to see that every person, beneath their noise, is searching for the same thing, the same quiet truth, the same unshakable peace. And through that understanding, empathy begins to grow. Life becomes less about escaping discomfort and more about embracing experience. You realize that silence was never meant to protect you from life, it was meant to prepare you for it. And so, you return to the same world, but not as the same person. You walk through it with a gentler gaze, a slower breath, a deeper knowing. You stop trying to extract meaning from life and start allowing meaning to emerge naturally. You no longer chase silence, you live from it. You no longer seek peace, you are peace even in the noise. The video closes as the scene mirrors the opening, the same person sitting in a cafe. But now, there's no phone in hand. No restless scrolling. Just stillness. Eyes softly gazing out the window, watching the light move across faces, hearing the murmur of life with quiet gratitude. The world hasn't become quieter. You've simply begun to hear it. And in that simple, silent realization, everything feels alive again. Silence was never your enemy. It was your teacher. And once you learn to listen, you realize the world was singing to you all along.